Chapter 11. Our Estates. At length the winds grew quiet. Brilliant sunlight shot through the clouds. The rains died back. Spring had come. It was like being liberated from jail. Everyone rushed outdoors to bask in the beauty. We were overjoyed to find our plantations thriving with young plants and to listen to the song of equally delighted birds. What a wonderful time. With freedom came work, of course. Our tree house was battered. The roof was torn, the house full of leaves. It took several days to repair. My wife asked for more tools to help her spin flax, and these I made. I feared the worst for Tent Home, and with good reason. The tent was blown down and torn, the supplies were soaked, the 2 kegs of gunpowder were ruined. What we might yet preserve we spread in the sun to dry. The pinnace was safe, but our faithful tugboat was shattered. Fritz, I said, we absolutely must find better winter quarters before the next rainy season. Could we hollow a cave out of the rock? He asked. I thought a minute before I replied. It would be a difficult task, but I believe we must. After we had Falconhurst back in order, we took the 3 older boys and a cartload of tools to Tent Home. I chalked out the shape of an entrance in the cliffside, positioned my crowbar, and gave it the first stroke. 6 days of rock chimping and sore hands later, our hole in the stone would barely have sheltered Nips, but we didn't despair. Soon we reached softer rock, and the easier going boosted our morale. On the 10th day, Jack was pounding a crowbar when he shouted, "It's gone, Father! Fritz, my crowbar went through the mountain." "Then run around and get it," laughed Fritz. "Maybe it landed in Europe. You mustn't lose a good crowbar." "No, really," insisted Jack. "I heard it crash down inside. Come see." We sprang to his side, and I thrust the handle of my hammer into the hole. I hit nothing. Fritz handed me a long pole, and this too probed only air. We had apparently broken through a thin wall to a great cavern. Shouting with joy, the boys renewed the assault. Soon the hole was large enough for us to enter. I stepped near the opening to look in, but after a moment I felt faint. I staggered back, wanting my sons to keep clear. When I got enough fresh air to recover, I explained. Some caves have poisonous air. If the bad air seeps in constantly, the cave is useless. But sometimes it just needs venting. Ernst, light a torch. He did so. I carried it in, watching closely for signs of change in its burning. When I was near the hole, it began to flicker and fade. I handed the torch to Ernst. "Now, my young scientist, hold your torch here. If it goes out, we'll hurry out. Until then, the rest of us will work at a safe distance in hopes of venting all the bad air." Working by Ernst's light, we held long crowbars against the rock and pounded. The opening soon grew large enough to enter, and I ordered restraint. "We'll take a break and then put it to the test. Keep a torch going, Ernst." It was hard to rest in our excited state, but better safe than sorry. After half an hour of relaxed conversation, it was time to experiment. Fritz bundled up some dry grass, then lit it and carried it in. My sons followed in high anticipation. I held the bundle near the opening. It burned normally. I threw it as far inside as I could, and much to my satisfaction it lay burning on the floor. The fact that it didn't fall into some deep crevice was also good news. Now we knew the cave had breathable air and a solid floor. While Fritz and I enlarged the opening, Jack jumped on his buffalo and rode for Falconhurst to share the news. We soon heard hooves and wheels on the bridge. Jack had hitched up the cart, bringing his mother, Franz, and all the candles he could find. We lit candles, shouldered our guns, and entered. I went first, probing ahead with a pole. We marched silently into a scene of grandeur. Jack's crowbar lay in a glittering crystal grotto, so beautiful that even the dogs seemed awestruck. The cave was much larger than we had thought, with great crystalline pillars rising from the floor like mighty trees. Golden light reflected from the crystal-studded walls. Stalactites hung like icicles, sparkling in all colors of the rainbow, sometimes meeting their stalagmite cousins that grew up from the floor. The floor of this magnificent palace was hard, dry sand. This was another bit of good news, for the whole idea of moving into a cave was to stay dry. It was littered with fallen crystals, and out of curiosity I picked up one to taste it, just as I suspected. rock salt. Our cave had an endless supply of the purest salt. But this also brought risk. What if crystals tended to fall without warning? This could be very dangerous. Stay out from under those, I told my family, until I investigate. I took a torch and bent to have a closer look. The crystals seemed recently fallen, probably because of our constant battering. Let's be sure, I said. Fritz, Jack, Ernst, stand with me in the opening. Elizabeth, please stay behind us with Franz. And both of you, cover your ears. When everyone was in position, I commanded my sons to form line and aim into the cave. On my order, fire! 4 weapons roared as one, and we watched to see if the concussion brought anything down. Nothing. Our marvelous cave was safe. We returned to Falconhurst full of plans and ideas. The tree house that had once felt so safe now seemed frail and vulnerable. We decided to live there in summer and transform the cave into our winter dwelling and fortress. To admit light and air, we chiseled through the thinnest places in the cave wall, fitting windows we'd salvaged from the wreck. We enlarged the doorway enough to hang the door from Falconhurst, leaving the ladder's entryway boarded up and concealed behind a large piece of bark. The cave itself we divided into 4 parts: entryway, kitchen workshop, stables, and the deepest in our cave was storehouse and powder magazine. One winter of choking on smoke was quite enough, so we built a proper fireplace and chimney. Our stables were better, and we made sure our workshop had room for many winter projects. When most of the work was done, we named it Rock House. The long stay at Tent Home taught us more about its advantages. Lobsters, crabs, and mussels abounded. Turtles often came to lay delicious eggs in the sand, sometimes in great numbers. In such cases, we caught some and turned them in on their backs long enough to pierce small holes in the edge of their shells. We then leashed them near the water on long ropes, ensuring a steady supply of fresh turtle for dinner. Turtles, however, were just the beginning of Tent Home's surprises. One sunny morning, on the way back from Falconhurst, the sea began to look strange. The waters appeared to heave and boil, the surface peppered with fire-like flashes in the sun. Over this area of water screamed hundreds of diving, darting birds. The flashing mass rolled shoreward with the birds in pursuit. This must be a herring bank, I said. In reply to the inevitable torrent of questions, I explained, herrings sometimes swim in great masses many feet deep. Flocks of hungry birds and schools of predatory fish converge to feast. The bank makes for shore, seeking the shallows where sharks and dolphins can't follow. When they arrive, the herring meet their deadliest enemy, fishermen, though millions are caught this way each year. The survivors lay enough eggs to replenish their numbers. My sons took the hint. Soon Jack and Fritz stood in the water with baskets, throwing the fish ashore to Ernst. As quickly as possible, we cleaned, salted, and stored them. We kept on until we had many barrels of preserved fish, carefully closed and stored deep in our cave. What a divine gift. The Lord's generosity had only begun. The next day, a great number of seals appeared to feast upon the remains of our cleaning. I doubted we could eat seal meat, but their fish and fat would be of great use. So we hunted almost 24 of these. The oil would be good for tanning, soap making, and burning in lamps. The skins would provide fine harnesses and clothing. These jobs interfered with our cave work for some time. I was eager to get back to it, for winter would not wait for us to finish. I had noticed some gypsum at the base of the salt crystals in places. Perhaps I could make plaster. I heated some pieces until they were reduced to a smooth white powder, which I mixed with water and used to seal some of the herring barrels. Why haven't you sealed them all, Father? I'll show you, son, I replied. Fritz, let's build a small hut outside. We constructed these from reeds and branches, then strung our herring on lines across the roof. On the floor we lit a low, smoky fire of driftwood, brush, and moss, keeping it smoldering for several days. When I felt the fish were well smoked, we packed them away. About a month after the herring bank episode, we had another visitor from the sea. Jack was the first to notice. Fritz, Father, the water's full of young whales, he called. He was not quite correct, but the reality was even better. The bay swarmed with great sturgeon, salmon, and trout, all headed for Jackal River to spawn. Now these are all our proper fish, cheered Jack. How can we preserve them? If you can figure out a way to catch them, I can find a way to preserve them, I said with a smile. Watch me, father, said Jack as he ran for Rock House. I was still weighing the merits of smoking and salting with my boys when my boys came back with a bow, an arrow, and a ball of heavy twine. At the arrowhead he had fastened a barbed spike, then tied the twine to the feathered end. He advanced to the river's edge, aimed, and shot. To my surprise, his shot struck a big salmon in the side. "Help, father!" cried Jack as the great fish darted off with great strength. "He'll pull me in!" I ran to help him haul in the monster. The salmon thrashed mightily, but could not drag us in or break the twine. When his struggles weakened, we drew the exhausted fish ashore. Fritz and Ernst rushed off to gather their own weapons, and soon we were all in or near the water. Fritz with a harpoon, Ernst with a rod and line, me with a pitchfork. Soon we had a fine pile of big fish. Eventually Fritz harpooned a great sturgeon 8 feet long, but couldn't get him ashore. We all went to his assistance, but even struggling together, we were losing the battle. "The buffalo!" exclaimed my wife, and off went Jack for Storm, as he had named his favorite mount. When my lively son harnessed Storm to the harpoon rope, the sturgeon's moments were numbered, as it soon lay panting on the sand. Next came cleaning and preserving. Some we salted, some we smoked like the herring, some we packed in oil. From the sturgeon eggs we decided to make caviar, the Russian delicacy. I washed them in vinegar, pressed out the moisture, and stowed the result in small barrels in our storehouse. The egg bladders would make excellent isinglass when boiled and strained, which could be used to replace our limited supply of window glass. This experiment worked well, and while the resulting sheet of poured glass cooled on a flat rock, I took care to preserve the air bladders. I wasn't sure what we would find for them, but my intention was to waste nothing. An advantage of the local climate was that the kitchen garden flourished year-round with little effort. We had a constant supply of peas, beans, wheat, barley, rye, Indian corn, cucumbers, melons, and all sorts of other vegetables. I grew optimistic about the corn experiment we'd done at Falconhurst, and one morning we went to visit. As we passed by the potato field, we found it covered with barley, wheat, rye, and peas. "Where'd all this come from?" I asked my wife in amazement. "From the earth," she replied, laughing. "Where Franz and I planted the seeds we brought from the wreck. You and the boys had already plowed all the ground. All we had to do was scatter the seed. When we got back to the cornfield near Falconhurst, we discovered that the crop had flourished, and that it was already appreciated. As we approached, a tremendous variety of feathered thieves fled the scene. Fritz sent his eagle after some ruffed grouse. His noble bird made a clean capture, and Fritz was close by to save the grouse and hood his eagle. Jack set fangs loose among the quail that dared linger. To my surprise, the jackal brought his master about a dozen. "You certainly kept your promise, Jack. Well done, both of you," I said. As we returned to Falconhurst, I brought up a new topic. "What if we had a small farm near here to pasture some of the animals?" All agreed that we had too many to feed by ourselves. The next day we loaded the cart with a dozen chickens, 4 young pigs, 2 sheep, and goats of each gender, a pair of grouse, and we hitched up the buffalo, cow, and donkey. Fritz led the way on Lightfoot, and we cut a new trail through the woods and tall grasses towards Cape Disappointment. This difficult march led to a large plain with many curious little bushes. Their branches and the ground around them were covered with pure white flakes. "Snow!" exclaimed Franz. I was not surprised Franz mistook the flakes for snow, but Fritz spoke first. Perhaps these are dwarf cotton trees." Closer inspection showed he was correct. The flakes were pods of soft, fine fiber. My wife was not satisfied until we had 3 large sacks of it. We climbed a forested hill to a glorious view of luxuriant grass stretching down the hillside. Dotted here and there were shady trees. A sparkling brook gushed down nearby into the rich green forest. What better place for a new farm, I asked. Pasture, water, shade, and shelter, all here. We made camp, and my wife prepared dinner while Fritz and I looked for a good site for a shed. When we found 4 trees in a roughly rectangular shape, we began to make our plans and then headed back to camp to have dinner. The next morning we got to work. I cut deep, square grooves into the trunks about 10 feet above the ground, and again 10 feet higher for a second floor. Into the grooves I inserted beams from the wreck to form a framework for the building. Then I built a roof of thin strips of wood, shingling it with bark and acacia thorns. While picking up the scraps to burn, I noticed a peculiar smell. I took a closer look. Some of the bark was American fir. From the fir, I said to the boys, we can get turpentine and tar. From tar and oil, we can make pitch to caulk the pinnace. It took us several days to build the farmhouse. We wove strong vines to form walls up to about 6 feet high. The rest we made of thin strips spaced to let in air and light. We divided the house into 3 parts: stalls for the animals, perches for the birds, and a sleeping area with a rough table and benches for ourselves. We kept the animals well fed so they would like the spot and stay near. I could see that we would exhaust our provisions before finishing our work, so I sent Jack and Fritz for fresh supplies. In their absence, Ernst and I went exploring. Passing over a brook that flowered toward the wall of rocks, we skirted a large marsh leading to a lake. Much to my delight, the swamp was full of wild rice. As I waded in to see if it was ripe, a number of ruffed grouse took it. Ernst and I fired, bringing down 2, and Fangs retrieved them for us. As we advanced, Nips skipped from Juno's back and began to eat something. It was always good news. This time it was strawberries. After picking as many as we could conveniently carry, we headed for the lake. It was beautiful, calm, and blue, populated by many splendid black swans. What a joy to watch the graceful birds fishing, paddling, and chasing one another over the glassy surface. I couldn't bear to disturb their happy existence, but Juno had no such scruples and plunged into the water. She dragged out a very odd creature, like a small otter, but with a broad, flat duck-like bill. We hurried up to get a good look before Juno devoured it. Any idea what it could be, Ernst? He thought for a moment. I think it's a platypus, he said. I'll take it home and stuff it. My brothers will be amused. Shortly after our return to the farm, Fritz and Jack showed up with the supplies. The platypus got the expected chuckle from them. That evening we named the farm Woodlands. Leaving plenty of provision for the animals, we headed home without them, a decision that proved a mistake. On the way back, we were passing through a forest when a shower of pine cones came raining down. A large troop of apes apparently didn't care for trespassers. We fired a couple of shots to scare them off, and Fritz picked up some of the missiles to show me. Gather some of these cones, boys, I said. The kernels in the middle taste like almonds, and we can press them for oil. This done, we headed toward a nearby hill that promised a fine view all around. We were not disappointed how rich and beautiful this land was. I decided we should also build a settlement here. With our recent experience at Woodlands, this construction went quickly. A few days later, we had another new residence, which Ernst named Prospect Hill. Near this new residence, I thought I'd seen birch-like trees. I knew that American Indians built canoes from large pieces of birch bark, so I took Jack to look for some. We were very lucky to find 2 magnificent, straight, tall trees, either birch or something very similar. I chose the one whose branches began at the higher point, then sent Jack to bring his brothers and the rope ladder. We slung the ladder over a stout branch, and I sent Fritz up the tree. Watch what I do, Fritz, and make a similar cut, I called to him. At the foot of the tree, I made a circular cut in the bark. He did likewise. Then we made a cut the length of the tree and began the slow, careful task of peeling the bark off the bark in one piece. The result was a moist, flexible piece of material, light enough for us to drag back to camp. "We can't delay," I said. "We have to work while it's soft and pliable." We cut a triangular piece from each end of the bark roll, drew the ends together into points, and secured them with pegs and glue. This gave a boat shape, but it was too flat in the middle, so we ran ropes around it to pinch its middle until it dried. Next, we cut some naturally carved pieces of wood to use for the canoe's ribs. We cut and fit these into our craft while it dried in the sun. At dawn the next day, we loaded the canoe and made for Falconhurst. Getting the sledge through the woods and the swamp was difficult. For part of the trip, we made our way along the foot of the cliffs that separated us from whatever lay inland. At one point, there was a narrow opening in the cliff. A small stream rushed through this gorge. This passage to the unknown territory inland seemed a serious threat to our security. We decided to stop here in order to build an earthen wall to close off the gorge. To further discourage wild beasts from coming through, we planted the mound with every thorny bush we could find. For our convenience, we left a small, winding path through the barrier. This was disguised with piles of branches and thorns. This exhausting labor took 2 whole days, and we were glad to rest at Falconhurst before continuing on to Tentholm. A day's rest later, we went back to work on the canoe. We fitted a mast, hung sails, and made paddles. I worried about its balance until I remembered the large, airtight air bladders from our fishing spree. I helped my son tar these well with pitch, and we attached them securely along the sides of the boat, making it less likely to capsize or sink. An American Indian could doubtless have pointed out many flaws in our technique, but we were proud nonetheless, as with everything we had achieved.